If you've lost muscle mass or heard that you can lose muscle when taking GLP-1s and you wondered why does this happen in the first place, I'm going to explain exactly what is going on in your body that causes this and what you can do to preserve muscle when taking GLP-1s. First, there's going to be a big calorie deficit, which unfortunately is going to negatively impact muscle mass. Now, with GLP-1 such as Ozempic, it's going to be great for weight loss because it's going to significantly suppress appetite. So you're going to be eating a lot less. So when your caloric intake is lower, your body is naturally going to burn fat as fuel, which causes people to lose weight. However, your body will also use muscle tissue as energy if there's not enough calories that are being consumed in the body. So one of the negative effects about just having a caloric deficit is not only do you burn fat tissue, but you also burn to some extent muscle tissue. And especially with GLP-1s, as our caloric intake decreases, so we're eating less food in a single day, but a lot of people tend to eat less protein, so they're not consuming the adequate amount of protein to sustain muscle mass. But in general, as your calories go down, usually you'll see a drop in your protein intake, which is vital to sustain and just maintain but also build more muscle mass. So that decrease in calories that are consumed, that's going to have a negative impact on your muscle mass. A common effect that some people will experience with taking GLP-1s is they'll report or they'll tell me that they have less energy and maybe they're skipping workouts in terms of their resistance training or strength training just because they're feeling more fatigued overall. And with that, you probably heard the term use it or lose it when you're talking about muscle. So if you're not getting a consistent and sufficient load of exercise and strength training, so typically 3 to 4 days a week at least of some kind of strength training regimen is what you're going to need to not only sustain certain muscle mass, but also to improve how much muscle or lean tissue that you have. So as people who are taking GLP-1s are feeling a lot more fatigued and just don't have the energy to go to the gym and continue and stay consistent with their workouts. Now, because they're not getting that adequate stimulus of resistance training in terms of enough days per week, they lose muscle even faster on top of being in a caloric deficit. If their muscles aren't getting stimulated and used enough to cause a change in the muscle strength, endurance, or even the size, just because they're not consistent with the number of days, right? So one of the side effects with GLP-1s, as you become more fatigued and just have less energy from consuming less calories, usually people will stop working out as much, or they'll kind of skip the resistance or strength training and focus a little bit more on lighter, easier workouts that don't really challenge the muscle, the main muscle groups as much. So that's one of the other reasons why people will typically lose a lot of muscle mass on top of having a caloric deficit, right? They're not strength training and conditioning the muscles as much as they need to. With that being said, there are two main things that you can do on a daily basis to make sure that you preserve as much muscle mass as you can and even improve how much lean tissue that you have. So first thing is you want to make sure that you stay consistent and compliant with whatever your resistance training routine looks like. So ideally, you want to aim for at least 3 to 4 days of consistent resistance training. Now, what you want to focus on is actually something called progressive overload. So week by week or every few weeks, you want to make sure that you're not lifting the same exact weight over weeks and months at a time, because that way you're not stimulating and stressing the muscle enough that there's going to be actual growth or change in the size. So there's going to be no hypertrophy, there's going to be no growth of the muscle if the stimulus or the weights and resistance that you're using isn't challenging enough. So whatever resistance modality that you're using, it has to be a decent challenge that forces your muscles to repair and grow, right? So progressive overload is going to be a big component in terms of what you want to focus on, where gradually you're increasing the resistance over time as you feel comfortable, okay? Now, the second thing that you can work on is making sure that you consume adequate amount of protein. Now that the number wise in terms of how much grams of protein a day you should take, usually that you want to discuss that with your medical doctor. According to like the ACSM and in general, what you can aim for is consuming 1 gram of protein per 1 pound of body weight. So for example, if you weigh 180 pounds, you're going to be consuming about 180 grams of protein, right? And then that's going to be just slightly less for females. But in general, you can always look up that information online or speak to your medical doctor in terms of what they recommend, or your nutritionist on what they want you to focus on in terms of your caloric intake and your macronutrients. But on average, most people can get away with having roughly about 1 gram of protein per 1 pound of body weight. If you started taking GLP-1s and wanted to make sure that you're doing some kind of resistance training, I made a video where I showed 3 different exercises for beginners that you can do with no equipment. And even if you haven't exercised in years, this video will be perfect for you just to get started on some kind of resistance and strength training exercises. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and click on the next video here.